A sharp knock came at exactly 6:45 a.m. It was authoritative, 3 quick raps against the wooden surface of my apartment door. Not the kind of knock you ignore. Not the kind that comes from a friendly neighbor or a package delivery. No, this was different. I knew this moment would come. I had been waiting for it, planning for it. But now that it was finally here, a strange mix of nerves and triumph swirled inside me. I sat frozen on the couch, gripping my coffee mug with both hands. My stomach twisted, but I forced myself to take a slow breath. The scent of freshly brewed coffee drifted through the air, mingling with the crisp morning chill seeping in from the slightly open window. From the hallway I heard Ricardo stir. Amor. His voice was thick with sleep, groggy and unconcerned. Who is it? I didn't answer. Instead, I set my coffee down on the table with a soft clink, smoothed my hands over my pajama pants and walked to the door. I glanced through the peephole. There they were. 2 men in dark suits, their faces unreadable. And behind them, a uniformed officer standing with a posture of quiet authority. Immigration. I swallowed hard. This was it. For a second, a tiny voice in my head whispered, "Are you sure about this?" But then I remembered the letter I had found. The lies. The betrayal. I squared my shoulders, inhaled deeply, and unlocked the door. As I pulled it open, the taller of the 2 agents spoke first. "Miss Williams." His tone was firm but polite. I nodded. "Yes. We're here for Ricardo Vasquez." I stepped aside. "Come in." The moment they crossed the threshold, Ricardo appeared at the end of the hallway. His bare feet patted against the wooden floor as he emerged, wearing only sweatpants, his toned chest rising and falling with steady breaths. His dark curls were tousled, a sign that he had barely woken up. He squinted at the men in suits, then turned to me, his forehead creased in confusion. "¿Qué pasa?" His voice was a mixture of sleep and irritation. "What's going on?" The agent on the right pulled out a folder and flipped it open. "Ricardo Vasquez, you are under arrest for immigration fraud." The words hit like a gunshot. Ricardo's entire body tensed. His eyes darted from the agent to me, his confusion rapidly morphing into disbelief. "Fraud." He let out a shaky laugh, lifting his hands in mock surrender. No, this must be a mistake. I haven't done anything wrong." The uniformed officer stepped forward, pulling out a pair of handcuffs. Ricardo took a step back, panic flaring in his dark eyes. "Claire." His voice sharpened, and when he looked at me again, something shifted. The confusion faded. The disbelief cracked. And in its place, realization dawned. His breathing quickened. "You did this," he whispered. I didn't respond. "Claire." His voice rose, desperate now. Tell them this is a mistake." But I didn't. Because it wasn't. I stood there, arms crossed, watching as they turned him around and secured his wrists in the cold steel cuffs. "Ricardo Vasquez," the agent recited, "you are being detained for providing false information on your immigration application, engaging in marriage fraud, and obtaining a visa under deceptive pretenses. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say." "Claire." Ricardo twisted, trying to face me. His voice cracked with something between rage and betrayal. "Why are you letting them do this?" I held his gaze, unflinching. "Because," I said softly, "I finally know the truth." His jaw clenched, his shoulders shaking. "This isn't over," he spat. "I swear to God, this isn't over." The officers tightened their hold on him, leading him toward the door. I followed, stepping aside as they marched him past me. For a brief second he turned his head, his eyes pleading. I thought about all the times he had looked at me like that before. All the times he had whispered he loved me. All the times I had believed him. Not anymore. The officers guided him out of the apartment, and just like that he was gone. I stood in the open doorway, my heart pounding, my breath unsteady. A silence settled over the room. The kind of silence that comes after a storm. Then slowly I stepped back inside and shut the door. I exhaled. And I smiled. I used to believe in love. Not the fairy tale kind, the real kind. The kind that makes you feel safe, seen, and cherished. The kind where 2 people build something together, brick by brick, until it's unshakable. That's what I thought I had with Ricardo. I met him on a warm spring night at a bar downtown. My best friend, Tasha, had dragged me out after my last breakup, promising me that a couple of margaritas and some good music would help me forget my ex. I wasn't looking for anything that night. But then I saw him. Ricardo Vasquez. He was leaning against the bar laughing with a group of friends. His dark, wavy hair curled at the ends and his smile, God, that smile, was the kind that could make a woman forget her own name. When our eyes met, something sparked. He was the one who approached me, confident but not cocky. Hola, Hermosa, he had said, his accent smooth like melted chocolate. You have the most beautiful eyes I've ever seen. I rolled my eyes, but I couldn't help but smile. You use that line on all the girls? Only the ones I don't want to forget, he shot back. We talked for hours that night. He told me he was from Argentina, that he was here on a work visa, working in international business. Said he had always dreamed of living in the US and was working hard to make it happen. He made me laugh. He made me feel interesting. By the end of the night, when he walked me to my car and asked for my number, I didn't hesitate. The next few months were a whirlwind. Ricardo was the kind of man who made life feel like an adventure. He was spontaneous, always planning little surprises from late-night drives to weekend getaways. He cooked me dinner, left me handwritten notes and called me mi amor in that deep, affectionate voice. I had never felt so adored. 6 months in, he moved into my apartment. At first it felt perfect. We spent lazy Sunday mornings wrapped up in each other watching old movies and ordering takeout. He introduced me to Argentine cuisine, teaching me how to make empanadas and chimichurri steak. He said all the right things. Claire, you're my everything. I've never felt this way about anyone before. I can't wait to spend the rest of my life with you. And I believed every word. But looking back, I see it now, how carefully he played the role. The first red flag was small. So small I ignored it. One evening as we lay in bed, I realized I didn't know much about his job. So, what exactly do you do in international business? I asked, tracing lazy circles on his chest. He hesitated. Just for a second. It's complicated, he said with a chuckle. Mostly consulting for different companies. You wouldn't find it interesting, amor. I frowned. Try me. He sighed and sat up, ruffling his hair. It's just a lot of paperwork, logistics, trade agreements. Not exactly thrilling dinner conversation. I let it go. The second red flag came when I asked about his family. Do you miss them? I had asked one night as we sipped wine on the balcony. He shrugged. Not really. We're not that close. It was the way he said it. Flat, dismissive, like it wasn't worth talking about. I wanted to ask more, but I didn't want to push. Besides, I loved him. And love meant trusting, right? Then came the biggest red flag of all. One night he came home late, his face tense, his hands buried in his pockets. Everything okay? I asked. He forced a smile. Of course, mi amor. Just a long day. But something was off. He was restless, his phone buzzing more than usual. I noticed him glancing at it, his jaw tightening before he quickly silenced it. Who keeps texting you? I asked playfully. He laughed, but it was hollow. Just work stuff. He set his phone face down on the table. And for the first time I felt it, an unease curling in my stomach, a whisper in the back of my mind. Something wasn't right. But I loved him. So I ignored it. A year into our relationship he proposed. We were at our favorite restaurant, candlelight flickering between us, soft music playing in the background. He reached across the table, took my hand in his and looked at me with those deep, soulful eyes. Claire, you are the best thing that's ever happened to me. I don't want to spend another day without knowing you're mine forever. Then he pulled out a velvet box and opened it. Inside was a diamond ring, glittering under the warm restaurant lights. Tears stung my eyes. Yes, I whispered. He slipped the ring onto my finger and kissed me, and for a moment, everything felt perfect. But perfect was a lie. Because even then, deep down, something still felt off. And 2 weeks later I found the letter. I wasn't snooping. I swear. He had left his laptop open on the dining table, and next to it was a stack of mail. One envelope caught my eye. The return address was from the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services. Something about seeing that name made my stomach twist. I glanced over my shoulder. Ricardo was in the shower. Before I could talk myself out of it, I picked up the letter and unfolded it. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. Application for permanent residency. Spousal sponsorship pending. My pulse roared in my ears. We weren't even married yet. How could he already have an application pending? Then I saw the line that made my world tilt. Current sponsoring partner, Julia Matthews. I felt like the floor had been yanked out from under me. My name wasn't Julia. I was not the person listed as his sponsor. Who the hell was Julia Matthews? I stood there gripping the paper, my chest heaving. And in that moment I knew, Ricardo Vasquez wasn't the man I thought he was. I had been played. Used. Just like Julia Matthews. Whoever she was, I needed to find her. And I needed to know exactly what kind of man I had fallen in love with. The letter sat in my trembling hands, its words staring back at me like a cruel joke. Application for permanent residency. Spousal sponsorship pending. Current sponsoring partner, Julia Matthews. I read it again. And again. But no matter how many times I scanned the words, they didn't change. This wasn't a mistake. Ricardo had another woman. Another fiancée. Another wife. My hands clenched the paper so tightly that the edges crumpled. My heart pounded against my ribs, the rush of blood in my ears nearly drowning out the sound of the running shower down the hall. I needed to think. I needed to breathe. I stumbled back into the chair, still gripping the letter, my mind racing. Who was Julia Matthews? How long had Ricardo been with her? And most importantly, was I just another name on his list? The sound of the water shutting off jolted me from my daze. Ricardo was coming. Panic seized me. If he saw the letter in my hands, he'd know I had found out. And I wasn't ready, not yet. I needed answers first. Quickly, I smoothed the paper out and slid it back into the envelope, tucking it into the stack of unopened mail. Then I grabbed my phone and hurried to the kitchen, pretending to pour myself a glass of water just as Ricardo emerged from the hallway. He walked in with his usual easy confidence, a towel wrapped around his waist, droplets of water still clinging to his skin. "Hey Hermosa," he said, flashing that smile, the same smile that had once made my heart flutter. Now it made my stomach turn. He came up behind me, pressing a soft kiss to my shoulder. "You okay? You look a little pale." I forced myself to smile. "Just tired." He tilted his head, studying me for a second, then nodded. "You've been working too hard." If only he knew. He reached past me for a bottle of water from the fridge, then grabbed his phone from the counter. I watched carefully as he glanced at the screen. His jaw tightened, just for a second, before he quickly turned the phone over, screen side down. Red flag. That had been happening a lot lately. I took a casual sip of my water, trying to keep my voice light. "So, anything interesting in the mail today?" He barely looked up as he scrolled. "Nope. Just bills and junk." Liar. I nodded slowly. Anything from immigration?" His fingers froze on the screen. Then just as quickly he recovered. "Nah, nothing new. Same old paperwork." Another lie. I swallowed the bitterness rising in my throat. He was looking me straight in the eyes, lying with the same ease he had told me he loved me. It took everything in me not to call him out right then and there. But I wasn't ready for a confrontation yet. I needed to be smart about this. I needed to find out exactly who Julia Matthews was. That night, while Ricardo slept soundly beside me, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling. His arm was draped over my waist, his breathing slow and even. For the first time, his touch made my skin crawl. I turned my head, watching the rise and fall of his chest, and wondered how many other nights he had lain next to another woman, whispering the same lies. I had to know everything. Carefully, I slipped out of bed, moving slowly so I wouldn't wake him. I tiptoed out of the room, my heart pounding as I grabbed my phone and padded into the living room. Sitting on the couch, I took a deep breath and opened Google. Julia Matthews. It was a long shot. There had to be thousands of women with that name. But I had to start somewhere. I typed in Julia Matthews immigration case and hit search. At first, nothing stood out. Just random social media profiles, LinkedIn pages, and a few old news articles. But then, buried on the second page of results, I found something. A wedding announcement. My stomach dropped. I clicked on the link, my fingers shaking. It was an old website for a small-town newspaper. And there, in full color, was a picture of a beaming blonde woman in a white wedding dress, Julia Matthews. And standing next to her, his arm wrapped tightly around her waist, was Ricardo. My Ricardo. My breath caught in my throat. The article was from 3 years ago. Julia Matthews and Ricardo Vasquez tied the knot this weekend in an intimate ceremony attended by family and friends. I felt like I was going to be sick. He wasn't just engaged to another woman. He was married. I don't know how long I sat there staring at the screen, my world unraveling piece by piece. The man I loved wasn't just using me for a visa, he had been using Julia too. Had he left her? Or was he still married to her while he was with me? I had no idea. But one thing was crystal clear. Ricardo Vasquez was a fraud. And I was going to make sure he paid for it. I glanced toward the bedroom where he was still sound asleep, completely unaware that his game was over. The rage inside me burned white hot, but I forced myself to stay calm. I couldn't confront him yet. Not until I had enough evidence to destroy him completely. So with a deep breath I opened my laptop and started my real search. I was going to find everything. Every lie. Every secret. And when I was done, Ricardo Vasquez was going to wish he had never met me. I had no idea how deep the rabbit hole would go. Sitting in the dim glow of my laptop screen, I felt like a detective unraveling a mystery that should have been obvious from the start. But love had made me blind. Or maybe Ricardo had been just that good at hiding the truth. One thing was certain. He had spun a web of lies so intricate that it had fooled not only me but also another woman. And now it was time to untangle it. I started with the basics. If Ricardo had been legally married to Julia Matthews, then their records had to be somewhere. I searched through public marriage records and after a few tries I found it. Ricardo Vasquez and Julia Matthews, married on August 17, 2021 in Florida. I checked divorce records. Nothing. Which meant one thing. They were still married. The shock sent a chill through my veins but I pushed forward. If he was still legally bound to Julia, how had he managed to apply for a spousal visa with me? Then a horrifying thought struck me. Had he filed multiple applications at once? Was he married to me too? My hands shook as I searched my own records. I had never officially signed any marriage documents, but what if? I exhaled in relief. No marriage certificate with my name on it. At least he hadn't tricked me into an actual marriage. But it didn't matter. He had been using me. Lying to my face. Manipulating my emotions for his own gain. I had thought Ricardo loved me. But the truth was he loved what I could give him. And I wasn't the only one. I had to know more about Julia. I searched her name again, this time looking for recent activity. Her Facebook was private, but her profile picture was public. She looked different than she had in the wedding announcement. Thinner, tired, as if life had worn her down. Had she already discovered Ricardo's betrayal? Or was she still in the dark just like I had been? I clicked on her Instagram. It was mostly locked down but I found one post from 3 months ago. A picture of a sunset with a simple caption, "Starting over." I clicked on the comments hoping for clues. One message stood out. "You're stronger than you think, babe. You deserve better." It was from a friend. I checked her profile and scrolled through her photos. A few had Julia in them, always smiling, but one particular comment caught my attention. "Can't believe you wasted so many years on that lying snake. On to better things." So she did know. She had left him. That meant Ricardo had jumped straight from one woman to the next, using Julia until she caught on and then moving on to me. My blood boiled. This wasn't just some casual deception. This was a pattern. How many others had there been? How many more would there be if I didn't stop him? If Ricardo had been with Julia for years, where had he been living before he moved in with me? I checked his financial records, something I never thought to do when we were together. I had trusted him. But now I was done being naive. A few transactions stood out. Payments to an address in Florida. Julia's address. Even after he had moved in with me, he had still been sending money there. But was he trying to keep Julia quiet? Or was there another woman there, waiting in the shadows for her turn? I copied everything. Every suspicious payment, every date that didn't line up, every lie he had told me about his past. The more I found, the more disgusted I became. Ricardo wasn't just a liar. He was a con artist. And I had the proof to bring him down. I sat back, my fingers aching from typing. The weight of everything I had discovered pressed down on me. Ricardo had been playing a dangerous game, using women as stepping stones to secure his future. And now it was time for him to pay the price. I wasn't going to confront him, not yet. If I wanted to make sure he was deported before he could sink his claws into someone else, I needed to be smart. I needed undeniable proof. So I started organizing everything. Screenshots, financial records, public documents. And then I drafted the email that would change everything. To U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services. Subject: Urgent. Immigration fraud report. I took a deep breath. This was it. I hit send. And just like that, Ricardo Vasquez's world was about to come crashing down. The moment I hit send, there was no turning back. I had just reported the man I once loved for immigration fraud. I expected to feel relief, maybe even satisfaction. But instead, all I felt was an unsettling mix of emotions: anger, betrayal, anticipation. Would they act on it? Would Ricardo even see it coming? And when the truth finally came crashing down on him, how would he react? For the next few days I played my part. I smiled at Ricardo, laughed at his jokes, kissed him like nothing had changed. But inside I was counting down the hours. Every time he touched me, I had to fight the urge to shove him away. Every time he told me he loved me, I wanted to scream, "Which one of us are you lying to now?" I didn't know how much longer I could keep up the act. But I had to. Because if Ricardo realized what I had done, he'd run. And I needed him to stay exactly where he was, long enough for immigration to do their job. 3 days after I sent the report, I got the call. "Miss Carter? This is Agent Simmons from USA's. We've reviewed your report and I'd like to ask you a few more questions." My pulse quickened. "Of course. We've looked into Mr. Vasquez's immigration history and there are some irregularities. His previous marriage to Julia Matthews is still legally binding, which means any spousal sponsorship involving you would be fraudulent." I gripped my phone tighter. "So what happens now?" "We're opening a full investigation. If we determine that fraud has been committed, Mr. Vasquez will face immediate removal proceedings. The very thing he had used me to avoid." "How long will it take?" I asked. "It depends. If he has other legal infractions, it could move faster. But I assure you, Miss Carter, we take fraud cases very seriously. Do you believe he's aware of the investigation?" I glanced toward the living room where Ricardo sat on the couch, scrolling through his phone like his world wasn't about to shatter. "No," I said. "He has no idea." "Good. Keep it that way for now." That evening I studied Ricardo closely, looking for cracks in his mask. He was relaxed, completely unaware of the storm brewing around him. "Hey babe," he said, pulling me onto the couch beside him. "You've been acting weird lately. Everything okay?" I forced a smile. "Yeah, just work stress." He kissed my forehead. "You need a break. Maybe we should take a trip. Get away for a little while." The irony almost made me laugh. He had no idea that soon the only trip he'd be taking was back to his home country. I swallowed my bitterness and leaned into him. "That sounds nice. Let him believe everything was fine. Let him think he was safe. Because soon his world was going to burn." 2 weeks passed. Then one morning it happened. A knock at the door. Ricardo was in the shower. I opened it casually, just another normal day. Except it wasn't. 2 men in suits stood outside, badges in hand. "U.S. Immigration. We need to speak with Ricardo Vasquez." I stepped aside, heart pounding as they walked in. "Sure," I said. "Give me a moment." I turned and called out, "Babe. Someone's here to see you." The moment Ricardo walked out of the bathroom and saw them, his entire body tensed. His gaze snapped to me, and for the first time in our relationship I saw fear in his eyes. "Mr. Vasquez," one of the officers said, "we have some questions regarding your immigration status. We'd like you to come with us." Ricardo's hands curled into fists. "What is this?" "Routine investigation," the agent replied smoothly. "We just need to clear up a few things. It's in your best interest to cooperate." His head whipped toward me. "Amor, do you know what's going on?" I met his eyes, keeping my expression neutral. "I have no idea," I lied. His nostrils flared. He knew. And in that moment, the betrayal in his eyes was almost comical. "How does it feel, Ricardo? How does it feel to be the one deceived?" I watched as the officers led him away, his protests growing louder. "You can't do this," he snapped. "I have rights." "Sir, we'll discuss everything at our office," one of them said. He turned back to me one last time. "Amor, por favor. Help me." I tilted my head, feigning innocence. "Why, Ricardo?" I asked softly. "You told me you had nothing to hide." His face twisted with rage and desperation, but I didn't flinch. The door shut behind them, and just like that he was gone. For the first time in months I exhaled. And this time it did feel like relief. The moment Ricardo was taken away by immigration officials, I knew my work wasn't done. Deportation wasn't instant. He'd have a chance to fight back, and I had no doubt he would try. So, I needed to make sure there was no escape. If he thought he could charm his way out of this, convince the system that it was all a misunderstanding, he was in for a rude awakening. I was going to seal his fate. I had already collected most of the evidence. Bank statements, public records, messages. But now I needed witnesses. People who had seen him lie. Who could confirm he had been manipulating me for his visa. And I knew exactly where to start. Julia Matthews, the ex-wife. I tracked down Julia's number and hesitated before calling. She had no reason to help me. No reason to even believe me. But I dialed anyway. Hello. A woman's voice answered, wary. Julia? My name is Amanda Carter. I'm Ricardo Vasquez's ex-girlfriend. Silence. Then a sharp inhale. Are you serious? She finally said. Yeah, I sighed. And I need to talk to you about him. He used me the same way he used you. A bitter laugh. Of course he did. What do you want? Proof. Something that can confirm he married you for a green card. Something immigration will believe. She was quiet for a long moment. Then she said something that made my blood run cold. She'd know. I wasn't the first one either. Julia and I met for coffee the next day. She looked different from her pictures. Thinner, tired, like someone who had fought too many battles. She wasted no time. Ricardo has done this before, she said, pulling out her phone. I found out after I left him. He had a girlfriend back in Colombia before he even met me. Told her the same lies. Promised he'd bring her to America one day. I clenched my fist. Does she know what he did? She does now. After he ghosted her, she started digging. Just like we did. She pulled up a message thread and slid her phone across the table. I read the messages. They were in Spanish, but the meaning was clear. Ricardo had been stringing this woman along while actively searching for an American wife. Julia tapped the screen. I can put you in touch with her. She's more than willing to talk. I swallowed hard. Would you be willing to testify if immigration needs it? She nodded without hesitation. I would love to see that man get what he deserves. With Julia's statement and the new contact from Colombia, I had more than enough to strengthen the case against Ricardo. But I wanted to go a step further. I needed to make sure he had nowhere to run. So I reached out to an immigration lawyer. Not for Ricardo, for myself. I need to make sure my name is completely cleared of any fraud involvement, I told the lawyer. Ricardo lied to me. I don't want this coming back to haunt me. The lawyer nodded. You're taking the right steps. The best thing you can do is provide full cooperation. The more evidence you give immigration, the stronger their case will be. Would it help if I got him to admit his intentions? I asked. The lawyer hesitated. If you have a way to do that without breaking any laws, yes. A confession would be irrefutable. I knew exactly how to get one. I just needed to make Ricardo desperate enough to talk. Ricardo had been detained, but he wasn't gone yet. I knew he'd find a way to reach out to me, probably expecting me to help. And I was going to let him think I would. It took less than 48 hours. My phone buzzed with an unknown number. I smirked. Right on time. I answered, keeping my voice soft. Hello. Amanda, it's me. Ricardo's voice was frantic. Listen, I don't have much time. These people are making a mistake. You have to help me. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to sound conflicted. Ricardo, I don't know. Immigration said you lied on your visa application. He scoffed. No. It's not like that. It was just paperwork issues. You know I love you, baby. You know I wanted to marry you. I swallowed my disgust. Really? Because it looks like you were never divorced from Julia. Silence. Then a nervous chuckle. Amanda, that's complicated. But it's not what you think. You have to tell them we were serious. That we were planning a future. I leaned forward, gripping my phone. There it was. He needed me to lie for him. And he had just admitted that without my help he was doomed. I kept my voice steady. Ricardo, tell me the truth. Did you ever love me? Or was this just about the green card? More silence. Then said, Amanda, por favor. You're the only one who can get me out of this. Just tell them we were real and I swear, I'll make it up to you. A cold wave of satisfaction washed over me. Got it. I was recording the whole thing. The next morning I walked into the immigration office with my phone, my evidence, and a printed transcript of the call. The agent looked at me. Miss Carter, do you have more information for us? I slid the recording across the desk. "He confessed," I said. "And I want to make sure he never does this to anyone else again." The agent picked up the phone, listening intently. When the recording ended, he let out a slow breath. "This," he said, "is exactly what we needed." I sat back, exhaling in relief. It was done. The trap had been set. And soon Ricardo Vasquez would be gone for good. Ricardo Vasquez thought he could outsmart the system. He had charmed his way into my life, whispered sweet lies in my ear, and used me as a stepping stone for his American dream. But now his dream was over. And I was about to make sure of it. The immigration office wasted no time after I handed over the recording. I received a call the very next day. "Miss Carter, this is Officer Delgado with the Department of Homeland Security. I wanted to personally thank you for coming forward. Your testimony, along with the evidence you provided, has been instrumental in this case." I swallowed. "So, what happens now?" "Mr. Vasquez has been officially charged with immigration fraud. He will have a chance to argue his case, but given the overwhelming evidence, his deportation is almost certain." I felt a mix of relief and unease. "How long will that take?" "His hearing is scheduled for next week. He'll have the opportunity to fight it, but with the evidence we have, including his recorded confession, it's unlikely he'll win." I let out a slow breath. It was almost over. "Will I have to testify?" I asked. "Possibly. If he claims the relationship was real, your testimony will be crucial." I tightened my grip on my phone. I was ready. Ricardo had spent years manipulating women, using them as stepping stones. This time he wasn't going to get away with it. That night, I received another call from an unknown number. I didn't need to guess who it was. I picked up, my heart pounding. "Amanda, listen to me." Ricardo's voice was different now. Panicked, desperate. "I know you're mad, but you don't understand what's happening. They're trying to ruin my life." I clenched my jaw. "You ruined your own life, Ricardo." "No. This is all a misunderstanding." His voice cracked. "Amanda, you love me. You know I love you. Please, you have to help me." I let out a bitter laugh. "Love? Is that what you call lying to me? Using me? Stringing along other women while planning your escape route?" He hesitated. "Amanda, I never meant to hurt you," he said, his voice soft now, coaxing, like he thought he could still manipulate me. "I was just scared. I didn't want to lose you." I stayed silent. "I made mistakes," he continued, "but don't let them send me back. You don't know what it's like back home. I won't survive there. Please, baby, I need you." His words might have worked before. But now, they were nothing but empty noise. "You should have thought about that," I said coldly. "Goodbye, Ricardo." And I hung up. The day of Ricardo's hearing arrived faster than I expected. I had never stepped foot in an immigration courtroom before. It was smaller than I imagined, less dramatic than TV shows made it seem. But the weight of what was happening felt enormous. I sat in the front row, my hands gripping my lap as Ricardo was led in, wearing a navy blue detention center uniform. His eyes met mine, and for the first time I saw something new. Fear. Not the calculated kind. Not the kind that meant he was plotting his next move. Real fear. The judge entered and the hearing began. Ricardo's lawyer was a sharp-looking woman in a gray suit. She launched into a speech about how Ricardo had come to America for a better life, how he had fallen in love with me and never meant to commit fraud. Then the prosecution stood. "Your Honor, the evidence paints a very different picture." They laid it all out. The messages between Ricardo and his ex-wife Julia. The testimony from his former girlfriend in Colombia. His attempts to marry multiple women for immigration benefits. And finally, the recorded phone call where he begged me to lie for him. When the recording played in the silent courtroom, Ricardo's face turned to stone. It was over. The judge sighed and shuffled some papers. "Given the overwhelming evidence, this court finds that Mr. Vasquez knowingly engaged in immigration fraud. The order for deportation is upheld. You will be removed from the United States immediately." The gavel hit the desk. It was done. I walked out of that courtroom feeling lighter than I had in months. Ricardo was gone. Not just from my life, but from the country he had tried to cheat his way into. And best of all, he wouldn't be able to do this to another woman. Julia called me that evening. "Did you hear?" she asked. "Yeah," I said, staring out my window at the city skyline. "He's gone." She let out a slow breath. I should feel bad. But I don't. Neither do I admitted. We were both quiet for a moment. Then Julia laughed. You know what? We should celebrate. I smiled for the first time in a long time. Yeah, I said. We really should. And that night I toasted to my freedom. To my new beginning. And to the reckoning that sent Ricardo Vasquez exactly where he belonged.